synthesis of review of related literature is a crucial step, and thus certain do's and don'ts are to be taken into consideration. And let's have a quick look at some of the guidelines and some drawbacks that exist in the present system of reporting the review of related literature. One of the drawbacks which is observed is that most of the researchers report the findings and the synthesis of research in chronological order. Chronological representation of the previous work does not involve any synthesis. So what needs to be done? This is the most crucial step, that is synthesizing the past work. And here you can classify the studies on the basis of the variable. Variable become the basis for organizing the studies, and next is whether the study has been conducted in the Indian context or it has been conducted outside. So you can make country as one parameter for synthesizing the studies, or within a country you can synthesize the research studies which have been undertaken in various regions of the country. Maybe you have Punjab one, you have Uttar Pradesh another, or Uttarakhand another, or maybe you have the studies conducted in northern region, southern region, western region, and eastern region. Then you have level of education, could be one of the variables where you can classify the studies, whether the study has been carried out at a school level, college level, or a higher education level, that is university. Then you can think of classifying studies into general and technical education. You can classify and synthesize the past work on the basis of the sample for the study, and that will be the level of education and the students which have been selected from that level. You can classify the studies on the basis of the treatment which has been used. Now, treatment here means that we are talking in terms of the experimental study. So whether the treatment has been only one short group design has been taken, or whether a pre-test, post-test control group design has been taken, whether the treatment duration varied from studies to study, that is one study or a few studies which had a treatment of 1 week duration. There are studies which have treatment for a longer duration. Within this classification, you can group the studies on the basis of the findings. So one can deal with, if somebody is interested in relationship study, relationship can be positive, negative, or there can be no correlation. And relationship can be significant or not significant. So while you are taking up studies and trying to synthesize the studies, then you can club all those studies which find significant positive correlation, followed by those studies which find relationship between the two variables but not significant, and then you can synthesize all that literature which says there is no relationship between the two variables. Likewise, you can think of study which is dealing with the differences in the achievement of students taught through two different methods of instruction, that is lecture and self-learning modules. So differences can be significant or differences can be not significant. And within the significant differences, you can find out that the students taught through lecture may outperform the students taught with self-learning modules, or vice versa. That is, students taught through self-learning modules, they outperform the students taught through lecture method. So that becomes the basis for synthesizing the related literature. Another drawback which we observe is that there are gaps in review presented in the chapter. And here, one study is reported in 1960, another study is of 1975, then comes 80, then comes 90. So there are gaps in review of related literature. So the continuity is lost, and it appears that no research work has been carried out during that period. To avoid this, what can be done? As I said, the first step in research is to identify the keywords. The researcher should identify the keywords and look to the thesaurus to find out the synonyms of those variables or the terms which are likely to be used as keyword. So one can broaden or narrow the search by using 3 Boolean operations, that is AND, which narrows a search. That means if I had taken up emotional intelligence and job satisfaction, so emotional intelligence and job satisfaction, when I put this in the search, all those studies which have studied these two variables together would appear. So I narrow down the search. All those studies which have studied these variables independently will not appear. And OR can be used to broaden a search. For example, a study which is intelligence, and I say intelligence can be used in a study or intellectual ability can be used. So I can put intelligence or intellectual ability. So all those studies which have included these variables would appear. Not can be used to narrow a search. So if I am using emotional intelligence, so I would like to exclude anxiety maybe. So I say emotional intelligence, not anxiety. So all those studies would appear. So narrowing or broadening the search can help the researcher to lay hand on the relevant literature and then synthesize that literature. Bigger doesn't mean better. Now, when I say bigger doesn't mean better, we have a tendency to include different studies in the literature, and that may lead to that some of the irrelevant studies become a part of your review of related literature, or the gaps appear because you are taking studies from 1930 and you are continuing up to 2018. So what needs to be done by the researcher? Researcher can delimit the period. Now, for example, if we are thinking of carrying out a research in the area of MOOCs, that is massive open online courses. Now this phenomena has picked up in 2011 or 12. So you can see that 11 onwards up to 2018, this is the period where most of research has been undertaken. So you delimit the period that you are going to include studies from 2011 to 18. Or you come across that there has been a change in the concept, the theory, then the change which you are taking into consideration and you are dealing with, so you can delimit the period to the extent the change was introduced in the concept or the theory. You can delimit your studies by restricting to the context as well as the sample. So all those studies which have been taken up at the higher education level, they only form part of your review of related literature. So you are not trying to include studies which have been taken at the school level, or you are including studies which have been done in Indian context, and you are not trying to focus on the studies which have been done outside India. So you need to delimit. Another very important point which can be taken into account is If the area has been extensively reviewed, then the researcher can locate meta-analytical studies and use that meta-analytical studies in the review of related literature. That will help in synthesizing the research easily. Then all those studies which are available in an area which is lesser researched can be included in the research. So as I said, if you delimit the period from 11 to 18 and you think not much research has been carried out in Indian context, only 25-30 studies are available, all those studies need to be included in the review of related literature. So you need to access the resources of information. Make sure that you don't miss any one type of source of information. So go to the preliminary sources, then tap the secondary and primary sources of information and make sure that whatever is physically available, the journals, the articles, the books which are physically available to you in the library, you access all those libraries and all those sources of information to locate the relevant review of related literature. Another drawback which we come across is sometimes incomplete information is available. And the person, when shifts focus from one type of studies to another, maybe the person misses some important components. So it is very, very important that initially the researcher tries to zero down what exactly he is going to abstract from the related literature. So as I said, objectives, hypothesis, design, sample, tools, major findings, suggestions for further research. Maybe you try to say that all sources of information which are tapped and all relevant studies which are studied, you will try to abstract the information related to all these aspects. Once you have this information for all the various types of studies, it becomes easier for you to synthesize and collate the information and classify the information on the basis of these aspects. And once you start writing, a consistent pattern of writing needs to be followed to report the various studies which have been abstracted. It also becomes important that while you are abstracting the information, you only record the information by using standard abbreviation rather than coining your own abbreviations. So at a later point of time when you are synthesizing the information, it becomes easier and you are able to interpret the abbreviations which have been used in recording the information. So in other words, the researcher need to record the complete information from the various sources of information and report that information in a consistent manner in the review of related literature. Sometimes it is observed that the review of related literature is presented by the researcher in present tense. As a researcher, you are reporting the work which has already been done, so it is desired that all past work is reported in the past tense rather than the present tense. Many of the work which are reported, conclusions are missed. Once you are able to synthesize the related literature, the purpose of synthesis is to draw conclusions on the basis of the findings of the various studies included in the review of related literature. So the conclusions can be drawn on the basis of the major findings. So the researcher is required to state what are the major findings based upon the synthesis of the review of related literature, and on the basis of the conclusions you can identify the gaps that exist in the research, and it thus helps you in strengthening the rationale for the study by summarizing the suggestions for further research indicated in the previous work. The review of related literature, when it is carried out, the researcher is required to prepare the bibliographic information. And this bibliographic information sometimes is incomplete. Either the complete author name is missing, the pages are missing, or the volume of your journal is missing. So what needs to be done? It needs to be ensured that the complete bibliographic information is recorded as per the American Psychological Association guidelines for books, for journals, for direct quotes, for indirect quotes, and so on. So I would say that as a researcher, if you are taking research in technical education, you are going to follow the APA guidelines. So have a look at the APA guidelines and try to record the bibliographic information incomplete and acknowledge the various sources of information from which you have collected the information. So these points, when taken into consideration, will yield the review of related literature which is complete, consistent, coherent, and provides you the synthesis of the various works which have been carried out.